get better performance out of it. So, just some housekeeping. This is a live session, and it is being recorded, and it will be available to all Pivot members afterwards. And as was just mentioned, we will have a question and answer at the end, so please don't hesitate to post any questions you may have in the little question box. So, our agenda for today, just a real quick introduction, and then we'll discuss how we use network automation at Fiserv. I'll provide a couple of examples of customizations that I've done to maximize network automation's performance. So, we'll cover task performance, improving reporting and performance, HP support staff, and I'll talk about how I consider actually this an increase in performance. And then at the end, we'll sort of wrap it up and have our question and answer. So, a bit of background information. Currently, we have about 4,500 devices currently in network automation. We'll be deploying 2 new cores, replacing the current cores. Good news, looks like we may actually go and do even more than this with horizontal scalability with 9.2. We also have many satellite deployed at remote data centers. We also leverage operations orchestration. Some of you may be familiar with that. It's another really powerful HP product. We use OO to integrate with NA and third-party products. So, without further ado, on to network automation. So, network automation performance. From looking at the list of you who may be attending, I'm guessing most of you have some experience already with NA. Hopefully, everyone has found network automation to have an excellent foundation for your tasks. But at some point, more than likely your manager has or will come to you and say, hey, we need more. And when I say we need more, typically that means we need more tasks to run within, for example, a set change window. You may have an environment where your change window actually shrinks. I've actually had that happen to me before. Or you may just need to be running more tasks in a period of time. You want to get certain reports run between, the morning hours before anybody comes in, or you may want to have certain diagnostics or certain scripts run before you come in, but after a change window. So, how can you do this? Well, there's actually a few different ways to do this. And what we'll talk about today is basically a few different ways to turn NA into a lean, mean, task-running machine. First and foremost, you can tune the configuration of network automation and the associated database. Although we really won't spend much time actually talking about the database itself, we'll leave that for the DPAs. But we will talk about a couple items. We'll also talk about how you can tune network automation and how it interacts with devices, as well as what NA does and when and if it doesn't. And, always keep this picture in mind when you're tuning network automation. It's a balance. If you change one value, this may have some unexpected effect on something else. So, and I'll probably mention, or hopefully I'll mention this several times today. Before you change a file, please back it up. Do yourself a favor. Also try and limit the number of different things you change at one time. I mean, you probably hear this all the time. You hear it on TV, you hear it on the internet, so on and so forth. But I've not done that. I'll always say, well, yeah, I'll back this up. but then I'll forget or I'll be in a hurry. You really don't want to, because bad things can happen, and then you're having to figure out when something doesn't work right. Okay, well, what lines did I change, and what did they used to be? You know, it'll all start looking very confusing after a while. So do yourself a favor and back up. So, tuning network automation in the database. Most people that I've talked with are looking to do more things, for example, more changes, running scripts within the same amount of time. So many people just, you know, will be tempted to go in and change these settings that you see here, max concurrent tasks, max concurrent group tasks, things such as that. And just change those numbers to something larger. I mean, well, maybe not obviously, but the numbers that you see here are actually what we've increased ours to, but the defaults are much smaller. You know, it's very tempting to go in and say, oh, well, you know, we need to be able to do, you know, 1,000 tasks all at the same time. You know, if we can do that, then, you know, we can push out this huge change in just a matter of minutes. But unfortunately, not just as easy as increasing these numbers and clicking save on the screen. There's a bit more to it behind the scenes. If all you do is you change these values, you actually, it may work for a little while, but you most likely will end up creating problems for yourself. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So now here we've got you know, the dry and definition section of today's session. So hopefully I'm not going to put anybody to sleep, but if anybody's had any problem sleeping, this may be useful for you. So what I'm going to talk about is Java and just some basic definitions. None of this you're going to, you know, there's not going to be a test at the end, but I want to make sure that people are aware of these terms and how these all interact within network automation. So if you're reading documentation and it talks about, for example, a heap or stack or garbage collection, or if you're working with, for example, support, and they mention perm gen, and you know it needs to be this value, where you're working with you know, the heap. I just want you to have some general idea about what they're referring to and why these are key. Okay? So, you know, NA, as I would imagine most people know, uses Java. And there's what is called a Java virtual machine, and it's running once NA starts. The key around the JVM is how it handles and uses memory. I'm going to cover 4 pieces that make up Java. There's more to it than just the 4, but I think this is a good start. First is the heap. This is where runtime newly created objects are stored. Then you have permgen. This holds the details on what's in the heap. So if you need to find out a detail on one of those objects that were created in the heap, you'll find that information in permgen. Then there's garbage collection. This is responsible for the recovery of memory. So you may have memory that's been sitting for a period of time, a long period of time, that needs to be recovered. You're not using it. So obviously, memory is a finite amount, so you need to recover that over time. Garbage collection will do this for you. Then you'll have the stack. And the stack is a memory address space that's outside of the heap or permgen. So now, when an object is created, the object is allocated from memory, from the heap. So given that, the key here is when garbage collection is running, it's going to recover that used memory. and put it back so it can be used again. So hopefully this makes a bit of sense, but the key with this slide is that with garbage collection, it's pulling the memory back in and making it re-available for date. And we talked about the stack. So again, please back up the files before you change them. Again, I've had times where I've not done this. I've made a change, restarted NA, and then I find the performance is actually not improved. It actually got worse, and I need to go back. But if you don't back it up, if you don't have anything to roll back to you, it makes it a bit more difficult. So also, tuning is really an art form. So there's no perfect ratio or algorithm that's going to fit everybody's environment and fix everyone's issues. So you need to make changes slowly and cautiously, and then over a period of time, see how your environment reacts to those changes. Think of it as, if you go to a doctor and you're talking to the doctor and you say, well, I have these symptoms, and the doctor is thinking, okay, these symptoms basically may mean, these illnesses, and then he'll slowly work on getting you better. You may take some sort of medication or diet change or whatnot, but you really need to be just methodical and patient when tuning your system. So also do yourself a favor and cover yourself and file a change request and let your group and your manager know what you're doing or when you're going to make a change. There's nothing more frustrating than having somebody start changing network automation. You're not aware of it. Something doesn't work right, or you're trying to do one thing and somebody else is trying to do something else, and the rug gets pulled out from under you. So just give everybody a heads up so everybody knows what's happening and what to expect. Now, on to the main part here. So NA configuration files, network automation pulls Java settings from the jbosswrapper.com file. And I've got the location of where this file is set. So to me, there's 4 key lines that are going to impact network automation performance around Java and memory usage. Those are the 4 lines that you see here. These are pretty much the default values. So for your environment, if you've not changed anything and you go and you look at this file, most cases, this is what you're going to see. So this is a very conservative entry that's going to fit the mass majority of environments. So it's very stable, it's very conservative, and that's why everybody gets this by default. Now, I've been in different environments where we needed to basically improve our task throughput, and the easiest way or best way to do that is basically provide more memory for Java to use. So, for example, one of our NA core servers has 24 gig of RAM. As a result, I've come up with these values. So you'll see that this screen here is considerably greater than the past. Excuse me. So I basically am carving out about 10 gig of RAM for Java to use, and that's opposed to the default 512 meg. So that's a substantial increase. Now, a couple of things that you may have noticed. If not, definitely want to make sure I point them out because they definitely are important. You may have noticed on the prior screen The additional .3 line, the top line there, was 1/3 of the initial and max memory. That's by design. You really don't want to change that. So just whatever value your environment needs for initial, or whatever values you set for initial and max memory, just take 1/3 of that, 1/3 of the total heap, and assign that to your additional .3. Now, when you look at this file, the configuration file, you may notice there's a lot of additional .this and additional .that lines. The easiest way for me, or the way that I've used to remember which one is the 1/3, is .3 is 1/3. And that, just makes it a bit easier for me to remember which line I need to change. Hopefully that'll work for you. Now on the max perm size line, you may have noticed that didn't change. It's still 512 meg. The reason that this hasn't changed is it really shouldn't change. NA has been really written and sort of tweaked and tuned to work best with this value. If you change it, you very well could incur some other Java errors that you would not normally see. So I would not suggest necessarily changing the max perm size line. Also, down here you may notice the init memory or initial memory and max memory are set to the same value. If some of you have worked with other JBoss environments, you may have seen where these values are different. But with network automation, strongly recommended that you keep these two values the same. It's rather expensive for NA to have JVM start with an initial value that's low and then ramp up to the maximum value as it runs. It's much better, much more effective and efficient for NA to just start with whatever value you want to use as the maximum heap size. So in my case, 10,000. And just for some basic numbers, I'm using about 40% of my memory for the heap. So, some of you may be thinking, wow, that's kind of low. I mean, 24 gig, that's a lot of memory. Why don't we just throw more memory at it? Well, here's basically why. As you see in the little picture, you've got the one kid on the right looking a little nervous because the guy on the left is about to take his foot off the teeter-totter. And network automation kind of works the same way. Again, it's an art form, and it's like a chemical equation. So increasing the heap size can definitely affect performance in a negative way. So for an example, when I first started out, I really didn't have much experience. So, I was thinking the same thing. Well, 24 gig, I'll be conservative, and I'll just use 20 gig of it. So basically twice what I have in today. But what I actually saw was NA would slow down. And I just couldn't figure it out. Why, I've got 20 gig. I mean, there's no reason it should be slow. Everything should be fast. But the more research I did, especially when I started talking with some of the developers, it turned out that garbage collection, had a problem where, because there's so much more memory, it's taking longer for garbage collection to run. And depending on how you have garbage collection configured, it actually will pause, the application will pause while it's running and it's recovering that memory. So I was basically making garbage collection take longer, causing the application to pause, and the users were actually noticing that delay. So, I started going lower and lower and lower until, I really found a value that, met our needs. We weren't seeing the delay. Network automation seemed very stable. And I was still able to really increase the task numbers to meet the goals that we had set. So hopefully this makes sense. Okay, one other area is around the network automation database configuration file. And that's listed here. It's the db-ds.xml. Not easy for me to say. But what I'm going to talk about is the C3PO connection pools. And really all you need to focus on here is there are different libraries that are used to manage the database connections. In our environment, we're really task heavy as well as report heavy. And there's actually two different pools that are defined in this db-ds.xml file. So what I was able to do was increase the max pool size, basically doubled it, or almost doubled it, so that would provide more connections between the application, network automation, and the database. The only other key that you'll need to do here is make sure that your DBA increases the size on their side. So a rough number would be you just sum up the two pool sizes. Basically, one pool will be for reporting. One pool is for other tasks. So in our case, I've got both set to about 100. So I had the DBA set his in to 200. And it works really well. So now we're going to talk just a bit about error messages. Now, some of you may have already seen these without actually tuning network automation, depending on what sort of environment you have, the type of tasks you run. Maybe you run a number of advanced scripts, or you're running an older version, or maybe you're running it on a 32-bit OS. But the key here that I just wanted to list some of these is if you were tuning or modifying network automation, just move slowly. Try to make just one or two changes at one time and give it some time and run through a good test on network automation. So what you don't want to do is make a number of different changes and then wait a couple days, not really run through a typical routine of tasks that you may do, and say, oh, well, I didn't see any errors, network automation is still up, so it must work. Let me, increase the numbers even higher. I would really suggest trying to mimic or run through, a series of typical tasks. So if you run a lot of advanced scripts, try to do some of those. If you are task heavy, let it run through a number of days or maybe a week of just typical tasks, and then check and make sure that you're not seeing any of these errors that are telling you, hey, we've got a heap issue where you may want to modify your init or max memory, or you may have some sort of issue where garbage collection is just wasting a lot of time and not recovering enough memory. So all of these things basically tie into some of the changes that you can make. And it's, today it's not necessarily key that you memorize all these errors, but just be aware of them. This is what you should really look for in your JBoss wrapper when you start tweaking network automation. I would say most of the Java errors you can basically control by how you tune network automation. The bottom error, the socket exception, you may need assistance from your system administrator if it's a different person, and he can definitely help you. It may also involve HP support if there's some sort of memory leak that you're working with. So You know, one of the big questions when I was at Discover, people would ask, why is this so complex? You know, why is it so difficult, you know, to, have, some sort of algorithm that will work? You know, I know some people have said, well, I've talked with them in the past, and I've basically showed them what I'm showing you now, and they'll say, well, I tried the same thing on my system, and it just didn't work. You know, we're still having problems, it's slow, or, we're getting Java errors. You know, how come? Well, it's a pretty simple answer, though it's not necessarily a great answer. Basically, it comes down to every system is really different. So, it comes down to what OS you're running. You know, are you Windows? Are you Solaris? Are you Red Hat? Because each of them has their own sort of quirks or requirements or behaviors. You know, a big question is if your OS is a 32-bit OS or 64-bit OS. 32-bit is rather limiting. I'd say if you're running a 32-bit OS for NA, one of the biggest improvements that you can do is upgrade the OS to a 60-bit, a 64-bit option. You know, if you're running on 32-bit currently, you're really limited on how much memory you can add to the heap, but maybe about 2, maybe 4 gig max. So, you can quickly see right there, sure, you can increase it from 512 meg to, let's say, 2 gig, but, then you're limited. So it really won't matter if you have 24 gig of RAM. Your OS isn't going to be able to handle it. So, it really does differ. Even how you use network automation. Again, for us, we're task heavy. So, we're doing a lot of custom work. We'll be in the future looking at, high scalability. We have a number of satellites. We do a lot of third-party integrations. And I do a lot of script and OO work. So all of these different pieces place additional demands on the JVM. So, there's really, unfortunately, not a silver bullet that everybody can just say, oh, well, let me enter in, these 4 lines instead of these 4 values, and not only will it be stable, but it'll be, it'll perform perfectly. So, again, this ties back to the screen that I showed at first with the default lines. They were very low. Why are they low? Because they're very stable. They're safe. So it really comes down to, okay, if you want to get a bit of better performance, with memory handling, there's, a bit of complexity, a bit of risk that you just need to work with. So that's probably the most complex and technical piece of my talk today. So hopefully I haven't lost anybody, and everybody's still excited about this. So, next we'll talk about how network automation is going to interact with devices. So, some of the suggestions that I'm going to make are really basic. But frankly, I'm as guilty of pretty much every one of these as anybody else may be. But I definitely want to mention them because some people just may not think about it. But to start it off, really simple, try not to add devices that NA cannot reach or log into. You may be in the same position that I'm in, where you have to do that. It's required. But try to limit what tasks run on these devices, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But here you'll have an example where if you start adding a number of devices that NA cannot reach, when it's running routine tasks, it's just going to cycle through. Say you've got a lot of device password rules. It's going to take a long time to get through those devices before it finally fails. So that it's things like that that just can chew up a lot of time. If you're in a change window or a time window where you need to get a lot of things done in a short amount of time, this is one easy and big area where you can save some time. Also, remove or deactivate devices that don't work. Sort of the same thing as above. You know, if NA can't reach that device, if your company will allow it, deactivate it. It's still in there. It can be reactivated when the problem is fixed, but at least that will keep network automation from burning time trying to connect to that device, trying to log in, trying to run those diagnostics, to pull a snapshot, so on and so forth. You know, one of the things that I do is I have a process in place that sends out a notification of devices with NA issues. So, you know, you may want to try doing this using emails, sending traps to a trap receiver. Maybe that will get posted to a wall board, but something where the right person or persons will be aware of this issue. You know, it's one of those, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? If, you know, NA can't get to a device, does anybody really know other than yourself? I mean, you need to make sure that somebody who can fix that problem is aware of it and is going to resolve that issue. You know, even in the future, you know, we're looking at doing auto open of remedy tickets on these types of issues. So again, you know, it's going to notify the right people about these issues and make sure that those device issues get resolved quickly to make network automation a bit more effective and efficient when it's pushing out large tasks. Another area that you can work on is remove or limit device password rules. And the key here is just filter as much as you can. The more rules that a device needs to try before it gets in, the longer the task is going to take. Sure, if network automation can use the last password that it used and was successful, that's great. But you're still going to have a problem when the device gets added, or maybe there's a device issue. And so that last password's not going to work, and it's going to have to cycle back through all your password rules. So, you know, I've talked to people who've had, you know, a dozen or more password rules. I mean, I think we have one case where, you know, all we really needed to do was just sort of reorder the passwords that were being attempted, and that really made a big improvement on, you know, time. Also, again, this is a simple no-brainer one, but a lot of people haven't thought about it. But limit the connection options. Make the options fit your company's requirements. Like I'm posting here, if you don't support our login, why have it enabled by default? You know, for every device that NA is having trouble logging in, it's going to, you know, try every possible access method. It's going to try every password rule. And, you know, that's just time that it's going to take to either be successful or fail. So, again, good option here. You can cut down on what I call unproductive device tasks. We don't run scheduled snapshots on the inventory group. Instead, I created a dynamic group, and that group looks for basically a config or to see if a config exists. If it does, that lets network automation know that this device was reachable and that network automation was able to log in at one point in time. So that device, you know, should work fine. Once, you know, if it's not in this managed device group, somebody's going to be notified of it. Once they fix the issue, network automation is going to pick up on that syslog message that comes in. It's going to run that snapshot task. It'll work, and then the config will be captured. And then that capturing of the config is going to trigger that dynamic group to recalculate. And therefore, this device will be added back into, or I should say added into the managed devices list. So routine tasks will then run. and it really cuts down on unproductive device tasks. Again, here I've got, what I was mentioning before. Make sure that people know that there's a device issue. When the issue is fixed, NA is going to be able to work much more effectively. Okay, password rules. If you have a fair number of device credentials, try to use the available options here to minimize the overlap. Again, it burns a fair amount of time trying to try bad credential after bad credential, and have network automation look for the correct one. Maybe you minimize it by specifying a password rule for a specific partition, or maybe you can narrow it down by an IP range or a device group, or excuse me, a combination of those. But it's really key to just try to minimize that overlap and maximize that when network automation tries to, for example, discover a device or connect to a device, it's not having to go through a number of different password rules before it lands on the correct one. Here we have connection methods. And for this, I try to go for the averages and not globally enable any option that maybe just a couple of devices use. There's plenty of ways that you can automate changing connection methods based on, for example, adding a device, event notification. You can use a script or a flow, or even do a multitask project. So really, just think about this and say, oh, well, we only have SSH. We have no telnet devices. Unselect telnet. Or, perhaps they don't allow TFTP. Unselect this option. So, look at what your environment is or what requirements you're working with, and try to, fit that here. So, and again, if maybe you have particular partitions or you have particular device groups that need something a bit different, there's ways to handle that within network automation. So you're not having to enable that across the board. I'll talk about drivers now. And a couple tips here as far as drivers and how this can really help with performance. First off, try to really stay as current as you can with your driver levels or releases. It's really a simple thing to do, and the only time that I can think of where I'm not as current as possible is if I'm using a hotfix driver that's not updated in that latest driver pack. Other than that, all you need to do, maybe you use Live Network, maybe you download them yourself, but just apply the driver pack when they get released. You should get notified of the release, and they really work well. And the benefit is that you're going to really benefit from everybody else's requests for enhancements or bug fixes or patches. So even though you may not have asked for these additional features, you're going to get them. Yet if you stay on a driver that's rather old, it may be buggy, it may work slowly, and it may not have any of the latest features. So do yourself a favor, get current as you can when it comes to drivers. Also, don't hesitate to open up a request if you find a defect, or even if you want to see something new and have some new sort of function. This is an area where you have direct input on the development of network automation. Take advantage of it. I've opened many requests, as Wendy on this call is, I'm sure, well aware of, and it really helps. I think it helps HP provide a really powerful product, and it helps you as well, because if you need some new function, you file the request. If it gets accepted and it gets put into production, there you go. And the sooner you put in the request, obviously the sooner it's going to happen. So, again, couple tips here. If you get a new driver, a hot fix, or maybe a new driver pack, you may want to just validate that everything is working correctly. It's, maybe you submitted an RFE and you said, okay, boom, here you go. They provided it to you in a hot fix. Make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. So easiest way to do this is just enable some logging with the task, and you're going to see, how the task is working. You can follow the task as it scrolls on the screen. And then you can see, okay, if it updated a diagnostic, is the correct information being captured? Is it working? Is it doing what you hoped it would do? If not, if you have some sort of issue, one of the first things that I try to do is I do a checkpoint snapshot. Depending on the driver, this may fix the issue really quickly. Also, if possible, and I totally understand it's difficult for us to do, but try to make a configuration change. If you can do that, this almost always will clear the prior issue. So I know the screen's very small and it's a bit fuzzy, but the example here that I have displayed is a device that's showing that there's a difference, or NA is reporting a difference in the startup and running configs, yet there's no difference displayed. So, things like that. Checkpoint snapshot may clear this up. Making a change will, I know specifically on this issue, would clear this up. So, don't just say, oh, okay, it's going to work. Take a bit of extra time, make sure it works, make sure your needs are met, that the performance that you're looking for, the functionality that you are looking for was met. Okay, moving on to reporting. For us, reporting is a key function of network automation. I've worked on customizing CAN reports, creating new reports within NA, as well as using products such as operations orchestration to produce amazing reports outside of NA, but it's using NA data. All of these are really easy to do. But keep in mind you've got really a lot of good and useful data at your fingertips that people may not be aware of. One of the things that I typically do when I'm providing user training or just sending out information to the end users is let them know what data is available. Or I'll just turn it around and say, well, what are you looking for? What would you like to see within network automation? That may sort of go back to, custom data fields and our last discussion. But it's really key to be able to report on this information. We use just some basic reports. You may want to create a report showing device issues, or you may want to report around policies and compliance. Maybe something as simple as a device adds, deletes, and modifies over a month, or a monthly command script report. I pretty much have to do all those for managers just to show them how network automation is being used, how busy it was, again, any problems with devices. So different groups will basically take and consume that information, and then it gets bubbled up higher up in the company. A couple more advanced options, but are still very useful to have, is you can customize canned reports. You can also create monthly reports, for devices, that have been added but don't have a driver, or devices that have been added but maybe don't have model information or configure information. And for those, obviously, the snapshots will fail. So one of the other things we do is a monthly report showing where NA is actually kicking off OO flows. And for those of you who are on the last call, we actually use that to populate the custom data fields. Now, all of this is really great and really useful, but just be aware in the back of your head, some reports will run slower than others. So, for example, the task data, there's a whole lot of it, especially for us, we're task heavy. So those reports may take a bit longer than, say, for a device report. Hopefully everybody is really enjoying the last change, or one of the last changes that was made within network automation around the config text searches. And I know that was actually spawned from requests from users, probably like yourself, like me, and I can definitely say it definitely sped up our reports based on configuration text. Here I just have an example of one of our customer reports that shows device access issues. Pretty basic, but really shows key information. And this goes out to the appropriate engineers for set devices or set subnets. And it shows all device access issues and sort of the nature of the issue and the duration of the problem. So maybe the last failure time or last successful snapshot time was a day ago, and you don't need to troubleshoot it. It's probably just a blip. But if it hasn't worked for a month or a week or a year, whatever duration is appropriate, those you can definitely sort and then focus on, and it's really been helpful for our environment. One key thing that I want to mention about this report, and the last screen I was saying how task reports can take a while to run. All of this data is actually device-specific data. This report itself, even though it is outside of network automation, you could probably do this within NA. You just wouldn't have it as fancy maybe as this output is. But since it's device-specific, it's a rather quick report. And here we've kind of covered this before, just other types of custom reports. All right. Now let's talk about working with HP support and how we can improve that as clients and how this is really in your best interest. To me, one of the biggest things that I think is important is, you need to document. I probably, if you ask, I over-document. But I just think it's so important to make sure that the issue that you're referring to is clear and you provide all the information that support needs. And that's going to cut down on some of the ping-pong nature where you'll open the case and then support will get back with you in a few hours. And then, they may have a couple questions and then you provide a response. Well, if I'm able to provide all of that information up front, it makes both parties' lives much easier. They can review the case, they see all the information that they need, and they can hit the ground running. They don't have to keep coming back, well, can you send us a troubleshooting file? Can you provide some screenshots? What type of device is this? So, I just make sure that, all of this is provided as early on as possible. Whatever I can do to improve the efficiency is really, to me, a performance gain. because NA will be able to do more as a result of whatever fix that actually, was solved because of my case. So again, that's sort of how it ties back to performance. Maybe I have an issue where a particular task or a particular driver is having a problem. Well, needless to say, NA won't be able to do certain things. Well, the sooner I get this resolved, the sooner that support's able to provide a solution, the sooner NA will be able to really take advantage of that additional memory that we put in place earlier on, or the additional reporting that we added, and so on and so forth. So working with support, I really think it's key, and it's really important to make sure that your issue is understood. So just because I think one of the keys for me is just because that you understand what your issue is, it doesn't mean that everybody else will. I actually talked with one of the main HP developers at Discover on an RFP that we had, and what he thought I was looking for and what I was actually looking for were a bit different. So that to me was a sort of an error on my end, because I didn't do as good a job as I probably should have on providing examples or screenshots or just specifics on what we were looking for and why we were looking for it. Again, logging. Typically, when I open up a case, I try to reproduce the issue and turn up logging. So over the years, I've kind of gotten the hang of logging, and I know what options will work best for what issues. However, if I'm not sure of what logging would be useful, I'll mention that in the case. I'll still, for example, include a troubleshooting.zip file. Maybe I'll take a stab at what logging will be useful, but I may see that, we really didn't show as much of the issue as I would have liked. I'll mention that in the case and say, hey, here's what I've done, but there's probably something else that could be better. Let me know what you think. But one of the things that I do that helps ensure that I have everything set correctly as far as logging and task behavior for similar cases is I use the task template. So in the template, I'll have whatever logging is needed, and all that gets saved. So all I need to worry about is just adding the device, and then once the task is run, I'll capture that task ID in the URL. So I can include that in the task node. So when I download all the files and upload it to the support case, I can say, okay, support person, here's the task ID, so you don't have to look through, pages and pages and pages of logs. You can just search on this task ID. That's the task that's having the problem, and there you go. Again, it's going to save them time. It really doesn't take much of my time, and it just sort of helps move cases along, I believe. And here's an example of one of the task templates. So, for example, I've worked with a lot of driver hotfixes. So if I have an issue, I actually created a task template that's specific for snapshot. And it's got different types of logging enabled. I have the store complete device session log, and I also make the snapshot a checkpoint. So all I need to do when I'm troubleshooting a similar type of issue, select this template, enter in the device, click save, it's going to run, and I'll make sure that I'm getting consistent results or consistent output from a troubleshooting standpoint. I don't have to, scroll through and guess, well, did I need this last time, or did this not work, or was this useful? It's all handled for me. Also, ask for feedback from support. Some things may work really well for you, but it may cause problems for somebody else. I actually experienced this while I was validating a hotfix driver. I was using an application that made it easy for me to do screen prints, but unfortunately, the output was a JPEG. So that basically meant that the developer that I was working with wasn't able to do a search. So it took him a lot longer to get back with me. And it wasn't worth the minor savings in my time. But had I not asked, I may not have known. He may not have said anything. He just, may have been frustrated or irritated, but just not said anything. And I would have been, I wonder why this is taking so much longer than it was, a month ago. So ask, and it's been my experience. HP support is more than willing to talk to you and give help or give tips or however much that you're interested in hearing. Additionally, I asked some of the support people, excuse me, that I work with for, what would you want to get out to the client base? And here's some of their responses. And I'll just pick a couple, but, prioritize the case according to the issue. I mean, not everything is serious. It may be serious to us. I had a peer of mine who, his group was interested in pushing out updates, iOS updates, and, one device failed, and, that device was an important device, and so he actually created it as a serious issue. And I was like, well, it really shouldn't work that way because it's just one device. NA is up, NA is working. I mean, sure, the one device may not be in terms of the iOS update, but, you've got to sort of keep it in mind or keep it in context of, we're not each client isn't the only client for HP. Also, mention any recent changes that you've done in your environment. This may not seem like it would be useful, or you may not think that it's related to network automation, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. Also include logs, troubleshooting log. You could be like me and over-document. If it's an obscure or sort of odd issue that's hard to duplicate for support, I've been known to create videos of the issue actually happening, and then I'll upload that, screenshots and whatever else. And lastly, for RFPs, explain exactly what you're looking to accomplish. I mean, like my perfect example was where, I was out in Vegas talking with one of the developers, and he was thinking one thing, and I was talking something else, and he was like, oh, so, just try to be as thorough and complete as possible. And there you have it. Hopefully everybody hung in there. But today we've covered how one can tune network automation to increase its performance and get more value out of it in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have one question. Is there anything you can throw at Java to make GC happen faster? More CPU? And that came from Scott.
There are actually parameters, or there's actually a couple of different options from a garbage collection perspective that you can use, or different methods that can be used. But you don't necessarily want garbage collection to always happen faster. What I would suggest, around that particular question, would be open up a case with support and make sure that you are specific about when the issue is happening. But yes, there are different options that obviously I didn't cover here, but you can change the different type or style of garbage collection that's being done. There are some where you can actually have garbage collection happening in parallel. And, as you may think, there's sort of benefits and drawbacks to each and every one. But just really quickly, if you have say, a lot of CPU cores, there's a sort of non-default garbage collection method that you can enable that probably will be a big benefit to you. Hopefully that helped. Any other questions?
No other questions at this time.
Okay.
So I think we're going to wrap up the session. I'd like to thank Chris Powers for presenting today, and for all of you for attending. Please take a few minutes after to answer our poll questions. We're trying to figure out what other topics you guys would like to hear, and we value your feedback. And I think that's a wrap.
Thank you very much, guys.